All right, Shabbos say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Cheshvan, Yankin and Lisa Statman, and Yitzi and Rebecca Statman for dedicating the Sherman Drushos this month, the commemoration of the first yard site of their sister, Menucha Shendel Yehudis Zichron Libracha Bas David Yosef. To thank Shmuel Rabin Karamkin for dedicating the Shurim this month in commemoration of the 25th yard site of Rabin's mother, Pesa Mira Bas Chaim Zichron Libracha. We hope that in the merit of our Talmud Torah, the Neshamas will have an aliyah and the families a nechama. With that, let us begin. Again, I want to thank also Rabbi Richter again for giving such a wonderful shir Baruch Hashem last week. It is a great schos Baruch Hashem to be back with all of you, starting a new parak today. I want to begin by saying today's daf is nothing like yesterday's. Okay, so we'll put that out there. So I'll say we are back. Sorry. And we're going to have record attendance today, right? Otherwise, okay. So I'll say, so let's go. So new parak in Yirtzeh Hashem. We'll say today's daf is Chaf Aleph 21. We are starting at the bottom of Chaf Amud Beis 20b. So we'll say actually a really fascinating sugi ahead of us today. Arba Nedarim Hitiru Chachamim. There are 4 different types of Nedarim that the Chachamim, that the sages were matter permitted. Now we'll say if you take a look at Rashi, so Rashi points out what does it mean that they permitted? Rashi says below Shum She'ela. Actually, the Ran says the same idea. If you look 3 lines up from the bottom of the Ran, Mefarish B'Gemara, Shemutarin Me'elehen, below Heter Chacham. There are 4 types of Nedarim that essentially are automatically permitted. Now, both say, saying that a Neder is automatically permitted is essentially saying what? They're not Nedarim. They're not Nedarim. Now, we understand that although it is phrased as a Neder, the vower did not really have intention to go ahead and make a vow, and therefore, essentially, they're non-vows. They're non-vows. So because they're non-vows, there is no mechanism that is necessary in order to release the vower from his neder, again, because there was no neder. What are these 4 categories? Nidre Zeruzin, again, we'll read them now, then we're going to define each category. Nidre Zeruzin, so both say, so Nidre Zeruzin we'll see means like Zrizos, a neder that was made in order to get someone else to take action. We'll see in just a moment. Nidre Havai, which Rabbi say literally means again Nedarim of nothingness, right? Emptiness. Nidre Shkagos, accidental Nedarim. Nidre Onsin, and Nedarim that were taken in extenuating circumstances. And Rabbi say our Mishnah only focuses here on the first category. So Nidre Zeruzin Ketzad. What's a good example of Nidre Zeruzin? So Rabbi say, so once again, using the word Zrizos, so Nidre Zeruzin is a neder I undertake in order to get someone else to take action. So this is a great case. So what's an example? Ketzad, here we go. Haya mocher chayfetz va'amar konim she'eni poches la min hasela va'ala omer konim she'eni mosifecha ala shekel. So we'll say, watch this case. There's Reuven and Shimon. Reuven is selling an object. Let's keep it easy. Reuven is selling a pot, right? Shimon is in the market to buy a pot. So what happens? Reuven says, I'm konam, which we'll say is right. Remember, what's konam? What's konam? Right, konam is a kinui. Right, konam is a similar equivalent term for carbon. So Reuven says, essentially, konam, I hereby take a neder that I'm not going to sell you this pot for less than a sela. Now, both say, just so we get our terms over here, Rashi says a sela is 4 dinarim. 4 dinar. So Reuven says, now we'll say, now the way the wording works is like this. So Reuven says, this pot should become usher to me like a carbon if I sell it to you for less than 4 sloim. Okay, so Reuven the seller is taking a neder that he is not going to sell this pot to Shimon for less than 4 sloim. Okay, 4 dinar. 4 dinar, thank you. So I'll say, so now what happens? Now Shimon takes his own neder, right? What does Shimon say? B'hala omer konim sheni mosif lecha ala shekel. So I'll say it's very interesting. So remember again, shekel is 2 dinarim. Shimon, the purchaser, says, I take a neder that I'm not going to go ahead and purchase this pot for more than 2 dinar. For more than 2 dinar. So we'll say, so now each party has made their own neder. Now we'll say, just to understand again the mechanics of the lashon. When you say konim she'eni poches chamin asela, so for example, let's go with Shimon now. When Shimon says konim she'eni mosef shekel, which means if I go ahead and I spend more than 2 shekel, right, 2 dinarim on this pot, then ultimately, again, the pot should be usher to me like a carbon. So they're each going and making a neder. So we'll say, what do you do in a situation like this? Top of Chaf Aleph. What's the halacha? Shneim rotzim b'shlosha dinarim. What do we say? We say, what are they doing? They're negotiating. They're negotiating, right? So Reuven is trying to show his negotiating posture by saying, I will not, right? I'm making an neder, I'm not going to sell this for less than four dinarim. Shimon is showing his posture, I'm not going to buy this for more than 2 dinarim. So the Mishnah says, what do they both really want? They both really want to settle on 3 dinarim. They both say, okay, so what does this mean? Take a look at the rant. First, Ran on Chafalef Amud Aleph. Shnei rotze b'shlosha dinarim. Shamocher hayedaito l'shlosha. V'lo niskavin b'nidra el l'zaris halokeach. So both say, now watch this. Watch this. When Reuven makes a neder, and essentially he makes a neder that says, I am not going to sell you this pot. I'm making a neder that I'm not going to sell you this pot for less than 4 dinar. They both say, does Reuven have in mind to really make a neder? Does he have in mind to make a neder? No, right? What is he trying to do? He's trying to move the buyer. That's what he's trying to do. In other words, he thinks that by formulating this, right, by taking a stance that looks like an immovable stance, the price is non-negotiable. What that does is it motivates the buyer to up his ante, to up the ante. Shabbos says, so this is what's called nidre zerazin. The Gemara understands, the Mishnah understands, neither party actually has in mind to take a neder, but rather what they're both trying to do is they're formulating their position in the form of a neder in order to go ahead and get the other party to take action, to be zoris, to have zrizos. So finish up that round. He says, Shamochar hayedaito, tapran chafal fundalef, Shamochar hayedaito l'shlosha, v'lonis kavein b'nidra el lazaris halokeach shelo ya'amod al daito. Shamar beis dinarin. Remember, Reuven, the seller, doesn't really have in mind to make a neder. Rather, he's just trying to get the purchaser, Shimon, to go ahead and move past his 2 dinar price point. V'shiyaskim l'shlosha, techina lokeach, niskavin l'shlosha. So to Shimon, when Shimon makes a neder, I'm not going to purchase it for more than 2 dinarim. He doesn't really mean that. Rather, what is he trying to do? He's trying to get the seller, Reuven, to come down from 4 dinar. V'lo niskavin ela l'zaris hamocher sheyaskim lakach. V'lo ya'amod al daito sha'amar arba'a dinarim. So the point over here is, even though both Reuven and Shimon are both making nedarim, neither really has in mind to take a neder. This is what's called, what they both have in mind to do is cause the other one to move from their entrenched position. So therefore, again, that's why the Rand points out, therefore, again, there is no neder, because it's clear that neither party has in mind to really make a neder. He says, now both say, we're going to see something very interesting. The beauty of the Ran is the Ran gives you like a panoramic view already in the Mishnah. Both say, we're going to see that one of the interesting things that when it comes to Nedarim and Shavuos is that sometimes we have to go after what you say and not after what you mean. So both say, this is, and the term that Chazal use for this is Dvarim Shebalev Einam Dvarim. You know, whatever you're thinking, that's irrelevant. We can only go by what? By what you're saying. I will say, by the way, which is an incredible yesod in life in general. Like sometimes we say things and we expect people to know how to interpret our words. Well, no. In other words, if you want people to know what you mean, then say it in a way that conveys the proper meaning. Don't expect people to be Rashi and Ran on your words and try to figure out maybe he meant this, maybe he meant that. Again, that's why a person has to be so careful with what they say and how they say it. Because people are to be taken at their spoken word and not some interpretation of that spoken word. Amen. So the Gemara understands over here, the Ran is explaining over here, that halacha l'maisa, this is not a dvarim shebalev. What this is common business practices. This happens all of the time. And again, it's common for the buyer and the purchaser to both phrase their positions as a neder, but the halacha understands neither is really making a neder. They're just expressing their current position with the hope of using the word neder to get the other party to move. So both saying, this is the first, so therefore again, let's play this out. So therefore, Reuven made his neder, I'm not going to sell this to you for less than 4 dinar. Shimon made his neder, I'm not going to buy this for more than 2 dinar. And then what ends up happening, they end up settling on 3 dinar, the purchase goes through. What do Reuven and Shimon have to do regarding their nedarim? What do they have to do? Nothing. Why? This is what's called nidre zerazin. It's not a real neder. Good, beautiful. Both say that's category 1. So it says the Gemara, Arba nedarim nitiru chachamim. So both say, remember again, the lashon of the Mishnah was that there are 4 nedarim, 4 categories of nedarim that the chachamim permitted. Amrali Rabbi Abba bar Mama Rabbi Ami. Amrit lan mishmei Rabbi Huda Nesiya. Man tana arba nedarim. We'll say, whose opinion, who is the Tana of this Mishnah? Because remember, again, the Mishnah does not have attribution. It's a Stam Mishnah. So whenever we have a Stam Mishnah, we like to know who is the author of this particular Mishnah. So who is the author over here? So we'll say, this is so fascinating. So the Gemara says, who is it? Rabbi Hudahi. It's Rabbi Huda. Why? What does Rabbi Huda say? You see, Gemara says, "Da'ar mishum Rabbi Tarfa only olam ein echa mehem nazir lefi shalom nitna naziros ela lahafla." Shabbos say, let me tell you this case outside. Again, we're going to get to it in Meretz Hashem and Mesechas Nazir. This is fascinating. Shabbos say, imagine the following situation, right? So I'm standing with Ruvain on the street, and we see a guy coming. And I say to Ruvain, "Oh, Ruvain, that's Shimon." Ruvain says, "No, that's not Shimon." And we'll say, now people get into an argument sometimes over things that are really just totally inconsequential and irrelevant. Well, we get into an argument with this, right? And I say, I am so sure that this is Ruvain, that when he comes and it's Ruvain, I hereby undertake a Neder Nazirus. And Ruvain's, I'm sorry, I'm mixing up the names. I'm sorry, Shimon, right? So let me start again, right? I'm standing on the corner with Ruvain. We see a guy in the distance. I say to Ruvain, "Oh, that's Shimon," right? Shimon says, Ruvain says, "No, that's not Shimon. That's not Shimon." I say to Ruvain, we get into an argument. I say, "I'm so positive that it is Shimon, that again, when it comes here and it's Shimon, I hereby undertake a Neder Nazirus," right? So Ruvain says, "I'm so positive that it's not Shimon, that if it's not Shimon, I undertake a Neder Nazirus." So Rabbi say, so there's a machlokes over here. So obviously, one of us is going to be right, one of us is going to be wrong. So the shaila is the person who's right, does he become a nazir or not? So this is it's a fundamental machlokes Rabbi Huda and the Rabbanan. Rabbi Huda holds there's no neder nazirus in this situation. Why? Rabbi Huda is of the opinion, the only way to become a nazir is through an explicit articulation. The problem over here with this articulation is what? Is that it's rooted in a t'nai, it's rooted in a condition. If it's Shimon, then I'll be a nazir. If it's Shimon, then I'll be a nazir. Rabbi Huda is of the opinion that the only way to affect a neder nazirus is with an explicit articulation. So therefore, the Gemara wants to suggest this as follows: that halacha l'maisa, the same Rabbi Huda who holds that nazirus can only happen with an explicit articulation, also holds that the 4 categories in our Mishnah are also not proper nedarim. Why? Because they also lack the explicit kite, normally necessary in order to go ahead and affect a neder. Take a look at the Ran for just a moment. I see the Ran on the left-hand side, in the intermediate lines over here, in the intermediate lines 3, 6, about 8 lines in. Look what he writes. And remember again, we've already seen from the beginning of the Masechta the connection between Nazirus and Nedarim, and effectively whatever is going to be true by Nazir will also be true by Neder. The iskish Nazirus. Telochayil imkain yikabel below tnai. Hilchach mocher velokeach shetaluv nidram bitnai afapi she'avru al tnaim lochayli nidrayu. So if you think about it, in our Mishnah, let's say the Nidrei Zeruzin is kind of the same idea. Both the buyer and the seller, Reuben and Shimon, the buyer and the seller, are both undertaking a neder, but the neder is based on a t'nai, right? In other words, the seller says, if I sell it to you for less than 4 dinarim, it's usher to me. Buyer says, if I buy it for more than 2 dinarim. So again, the neder doesn't work. Why doesn't the neder work? The Gemara wants to suggest the neder doesn't work because this is the position of Rabbi Huda. And Rabbi Huda holds that nedarim, just like nazirus, only works when there is an explicit articulation. Or in other words, if a neder or a nazirus is in any way anchored in a t'nai, it doesn't take effect. Nebo say, where does Rabbi Huda get this idea that halacha l'maisa, nazirus and nedarim only work with an explicit articulation? This is from the pasuk, ish kiyafli. So again, Rabbi Huda darshans yafli means ultimately explicit articulation. Good. Rava says not necessarily. Afilu tema rabbanan. It will say the truth is our Mishnah could reflect the view even according to Rabbanan. I will say now the Rabbanan are the one who argue on Rabbi Huda in the case in Nazir, and they hold that in this case whoever is right will become a Nazir. Right? In other words, whether it was Shimon, wasn't Shimon, either me or Reuven is going to be right, so whoever's right becomes a Nazir. Because the Rabbanan hold that you could have a Nazirus that takes effect as a result of the Tanai. But the Rabbanan could still be the author of our Mishnah. Why? Mi katani shnehen ratzu. Does it say ultimately again Shnehen Ratzu? They both want. Rather, it says Shnehen Rotzin Katani. Now, both say, now what does this mean? Take a look at the Ran again. It's actually quite interesting. Look at the Ran. Rava Amar Afilu Timra Barami Katani Shnehen Ratzu. Kilomar Timas Nisin Dinidre Zeruzin Lav Mishum Haflahi Ella Mishum Sheshamu Chachamim Daitam Shelo Nadru Bedafka Ella Lazaris. So, both say the Gemara makes an interesting observation. So Rava says the truth is, our Mishnah has nothing to do with Tanai. The reason why Nidre Zerazin ultimately, again, are not in Neder Arabosai is because Chazal understood this is the way people do business. This is the way people do business. In other words, there's no Neder over here because this discussion doesn't even enter into the realm of Nedarim at all. It's not a Neder. It's not a Neder. Chazal understood that in the marketplace, right, in the shuk, in the marketplace, this is how people talk. They make extreme statements that make it sound like they're immovable on the price point. They even attach a neder to it to show their seriousness to it. But again, 2 minutes later, they agree on a different price and they're best of friends. So because Chazal understood that this is the way that people do business, it's not a neder at all. In fact, again, if you look at the Ran says, oh yeah, Rava Amar Afilu Timra Rabbanan Ki Katani, I'm sorry, Shnei and Rotze Katani, Demashma Metchil Vatzov. If it would be about reaching an agreement and having like a new mindset, they would have said Shneim Ratzu. The fact that it says Shneihen Rotzin, they both say the lashon of Rotzin means this is what they were agreeable to the entire time. In other words, when Ruvain the seller originally says, I hereby take a neder to answer the item to me if I sell it for less than 4 dinar. At the time that he's making that neder, what is he thinking in his mind? I'm good with 3. I'm good with 3, right? And when Shimon goes ahead and says, I hereby take a neder if I purchase this for any more than 2 dinar, what is he thinking in his mind? I'm good with 3. So because that Rabbi say, again, what the Gemara is pointing out over here is, there's no neder. You see, the machlokes Rabbi Yehuda and the Rabbanan by Nazir is a machlokes in the mechanics of a neder nazirus. Can a neder nazirus occur with a tanai or not? Rabbi Yehuda says no. Nazirus can only apply with explicit articulation. The Rabbanon say yes. So the Gemara wanted to say, oh, who's our Mishnah according to? To which Rava says, our Mishnah is according to everyone. Do you know why? Because in our Mishnah, the whole chap is, it's not a neder. It's not a neder. Because this we assume from the beginning that this is just business posturing. No one undertook a neder here at all. Incredible. Amar Rabbeinu Ravashi. Amar lo tfei meisela. So we'll say now an interesting variation of this case. Some of the Rabbeinu Ravashi. So Rabbeinu said Ravashi. He says Amar lo tfei meisela v'hala Amar betzil mishekel nidra havi o zeruz and havi. Now both say take a look at the Ran. So the Ran is 5 lines up from the bottom. This is actually very interesting. Amar lo tfei meisela. So look at the Ran. He says kilomar shamar lo konim sheini poches lo lecha minasela upruta v'lo keach Amar konim shani mosif lecha al shekel pachos pruta. So we'll say, now watch this. What if Ruvain the seller said, I will not sell this to you for less than a sela and a pruta. So we'll say, so let's say he says, I will not sell this to you. I will not sell this to you for less than 4 dinar and a sela. Okay? And now, and the pruta. 4 dinar and the pruta, right? And now the purchaser, Shimon, says, I will not buy this from you. I will not purchase it from you for less than a shekel less a pruta. So we'll say, what's the difference in this case? In this case, they're using much more exact amounts. So we'll say, in the case of the Mishnah, so Reuven was saying, I'm not going to sell it to you for less than 4 dinar. Shimon saying, I'm not going to buy it for less than for more than 2 dinar. Okay. What happens if they get into more specific amounts? I'm not going to sell it to you for less than 4 dinar plus a pruta. And Shimon says, I'm not going to sell it to you. I'm not going to purchase it for less than 2 dinar minus a pruta. Right? So what happens? So when they get into that type of specific amounts, do we still say, look at the Gemara. So Gemara says, Nidra Havi. So now do we say that once you get into such specific amounts, maybe that is a neder. Maybe that's a neder. Oh, Zeruzin Havi. Or maybe not. Maybe still again, I both say, this is business passion. I both say, Lashon of Zeruzin means they're each trying to get each other to move. It's not really a neder. So we learn this. Here we go. So I both say, very interesting case. Listen to this. I both say, I want Reuven to come over to my house. Right? I want to invite Reuven over to a Suda, and I'm chaperoning him to come over to the house. Reuven doesn't want to come to my house. Doesn't want to come to my house. I both say, not because he doesn't like me, but Lamaisi, maybe he just feels that I don't have enough to give him. He really just doesn't want to impose. So what does he say? Va'amar lo, konem beischa shani nichnas, tipas tzonin shani toim. Reuven makes a neder. What does he say? Your home should be konam to me for my entering to it. So essentially, Reuven makes a neder that I'm not allowed to enter your home, and I can't even drink a drop of cold water. So he makes a pretty extreme neder. What's the halacha? Mutar lekanis labeso v'lishtos hemenotzonin. Reuven's allowed to enter into my house, and he's allowed to also drink some cold water, a drop of cold water. Why? Shalonis kavin ze ela l'shum achila ushtia. Because I will say, what did Reuven mean to do when he went ahead and he made that neder? What did he mean to do? Now, he made a neder, but what did he mean to make a neder for? Eating and drinking. Right? In other words, Reuven doesn't want to come over to my house for a meal. That's what he doesn't want. So therefore, again, he makes a neder that he's not going to step foot into my house, and he's not even going to take a drop of cold water. But the Gemara understands he doesn't really mean to prohibit his entry into my home, nor does he mean to prohibit something minuscule like a drop of water. What he means to prohibit to himself is the consumption of my food. That's what he means to prohibit. So I will say, therefore, even though he phrased the neder as entry into my home, as drinking a drop of the water, Lamaisi is allowed to enter into the home, and he's allowed to drink a drop of water. Why? Again, because Reuven's intention was only to prohibit some eating and drinking. Says the Gemara, 1 second. But by the way, take a look at the Ran, last lines of the Ran. The Ran says, Alma, Afa gav dinoches lediyuka, v'shenisrachek harbe mimasha haya rotze chavero shiyochal, shari asa afilu drisa saregel shtes sonin, hafilu hachi, aminan delav bidafka nadar. So I just want to point out, what do you see from here? You see from here that even when a person, well, actually, let's finish up the Gemara. So the Gemara says, "Va'amai va'tipas sonin kamar." He said a drop of cold water. El mishtay inish hachi. So I will say, because sometimes what ends up happening is when a person wants to prohibit something, he uses a more extreme form of lashon. But I will say, see, what's interesting over here is the Gemara understands what Reuven is trying to do is preclude himself from eating my food and drinking my wine. That's what he's precluding himself from. But Lamaisi uses a more extreme lashon in order to go and make that point. But the more extreme lashon is viewed as neder hyperbole and not exact neder lashon. So Gemara suggests so too over here, so too in our case. When Reuven says, I'm not going to sell this to you for more than what? For less than, 4 dinar and a pruta, right? And Shimon says, I'm not going to purchase it for any more than 2 nedarim less a pruta. They don't mean that. It's still nidre zerazin. So the Gemara says, hachanami. So the Gemara says, hachanami mishtai inshi. So the Gemara says, if you go back to the Ran for just a moment, the Ran says, hachanami afagav da'amar. Actually, the Ran turns the page. Afagav da'amar chad tfei min sela v'idach b'tzir min shekel zerazin hu v'lav dafas. Therefore, what the Gemara wants to suggest is that even when they use more exact amounts, that's no different than when Reuven goes ahead and takes a neder and says, I hereby take a neder, I'm not entering into your home, not drinking a drop of your water. We look at that as neder hyperbole, right? And it does not mean to actually prohibit those items. So Hachi Amarle, so I'm sorry, Amarle, so Chaf Aleph from the base, right? El Mishtay Inish Hachi Nami Mishtay Inish Hachi Amarle. Me dummy, how can you go ahead and compare the cases? So what the Gemara is suggesting is like this. We're equating the two cases now, right? Equating the two cases. We want to say, just like in the case where I tell Reuven, I'm pressuring Reuven, come eat by me, come eat by me, come eat by me. Reuven doesn't want to eat by me. So what does he do? He takes a neder. What's the lashon of the neder? The lashon of the neder is, konam, I am not allowed to enter into your house, not even walk into your house, and I can't even take a drop of cold water from you. How do we interpret that neder? And I will say, now it is a neder, but how do we interpret it? We interpret it only on achila and shtia. He did not mean to prohibit that in a hyperbolic way, right? Literally what he said. So to what the Gemara wants to suggest is when Reuven, so we'll say, let's take one more step back. What does everyone agree with? Everyone agrees in the case of where Reuven the seller says, I'm not going to sell it for less than 4 dinar. And Shimon the buyer says, I'm not buying it for more than 2 dinar. Everyone agrees. What do we call that? Nidre zerazin. What's the status of nidre zerazin? Not nedarim. It's just business. It's just posturing. What's our shaila? When they both get a bit more specific. right? When Reuven says, I'm not going to sell to you for less than 4 dinar and a pruta, and Shimon says, I'm not purchasing it for less than 2 shekel minus a pruta. Once you get into those specific amounts, is that Nidrei Zerizin? Or maybe that's a real neder. So the Gemara wants to compare the pruta cases, ultimately with the guy who makes the hyperbolic neder not to enter his friend's home, right? Reuben says, I'm not entering into you, I'm not drinking your water. So the Gemara says the same way that we don't use that hyperbolic statement as a literal neder, so too over here with the use of the prutas by the purchase amount, right? By the purchase amount, we'll also interpret that as a bit of neder hyperbole and just include that in Nidrei Zerizin. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, mi dummy, how can you compare the cases? Here we go. Top of Chafal Mabeis, first line, 21b. So Gabeit Sonan, when it comes ultimately again to the cold water, here's the problem. Tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osin harbe. Here's the problem. Maybe, first we'll take a look at the Ran. Mi dami Gabeit Sonan, tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osim harbe. A tzadik, tzadikim, they say little and they do much. Now, what does that mean? Look at the Ran. Second line in the Ran. Hilchach mistafi hai di imodele betipas sonin shelo yachilenu harbe. Umishum hachi amar tipas sonin v'lav dafka. So we'll say, here's the difference. You see, when I'm inviting Reuven in, so Reuven knows that how does a Jew do achnasas archim, right? It starts with a little, and ultimately, again, before I know it, it's going to be a lot. So Reuven feels that in order not to impose upon me, he has to go ahead and even make an extreme statement like I'm not even going to have a drop of water. But he doesn't literally mean that. Instead, what he's just trying to prevent is me giving him anything or him partaking of anything of mine. That's why both say we understand that what's Reuven's intention. Reuven's intention is to take a neder, not to eat my food. The reason he frames it in a more extreme way is because the derech of tzaddikim is, give them an inch, they'll take a foot, right? Give the tzaddik an opportunity to do a little bit of achnasas archim, right? It starts with a glass of water, and before you know it, ultimately again, it's a 10-course meal. So I'll just tell you an amazing mice when I was in the airport yesterday morning. I was getting my luggage, and I was standing next to a guy who just started talking to me. And he told me about, sometimes you run into people who whatever. So he was telling me that he was visiting he was there on business. He was visiting his relatives. It was so beautiful. He told me that he went to his relatives on Shabbos night for dinner, and he walked in a little bit late. The man told me, he said, I'm not so religious. He walked in a little bit late, and he said that his relatives were watching the soccer game. Okay, so he walks in, they shut off the television, everybody puts on a yarmulke, and they said, could we, Sfardim are very, very different like that. It's something so different that we Ashkenazim could learn from in terms of just an appreciation of tradition. No matter what you do observe or don't observe, but just an appreciation of tradition. So he said, no, I'm not so hungry. So they said, would you like a glass of tea? So he said, sure, I'll take a glass of tea. So this is what he said. It was Mamsh's Gemara. I said, well, this glass of tea, you can't have tea by itself, right? So what happens? There's some cake. But once we're having cake, did you have dinner? No. He said, literally, it was a reverse meal. So literally, again, it started with a glass of tea, dessert, main, appetite, like mamish, it was a whole thing. So that's tzaddikim. So ultimately, again, tzaddikim, they start with, right? So Reuven understands that if he takes me up on a glass of water, then before I know it, again, it's an entire meal. Finishing the Ran, but I will say, maybe in the case where Reuven is saying, listen, I'm not going to sell for less than 4 dinar and a pruta. And Shimon is saying, I'm not going to go ahead and purchase for any more than 2 dinarim less a pruta. Maybe they're being exact. So the Gemara says, Halcha sveika hava, tilma pachos misela v'yosra shekel kamar. Reason havi. O Dilma, Dafka Ka'amar, Vinitra Havi. Rabbi say here, we really don't know. When they get into this level of specificity regarding prices, how do we view this? Do we view this as an actual neder, or is it still called Nidrei Zerizin? To which the Gemara says, Tiboy. Rabbi remember again, what does Tiboy mean in Maseches Nedarim? Teku. So we'll say it's quite interesting. So here's what we have. We have in a case where we're using, I guess we'll call it round numbers. So Reuven says, I take a neder, I will not sell for less than 4 dinar. Shimon says, I take a neder, I'm not going to buy for more than 2 dinar. Everyone agrees that is a case of Nidrei Zerizin. The shaila is when we get into a situation where they're being much more specific. Ruvain, I'm not selling for less than 4 dinar and a pruta. Shimon, I'm not buying for more than 2 dinar less a pruta. So what is that? Is that nidre zeruzin still, or is that actual? Or is it actual neder? Teku. Incredible. Boss, I'll just point out something amazing. It's very interesting that the Gemara uses the lashon over here. The Gemara uses lashon over here of tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osin harbe. Right? Tzadikim, right? They go ahead and they say little, but they do a lot. So both say, I just want to point out what's happening over here. Just to frame this. So right, I'm inviting Reuven over to my meal. Reuven doesn't want to eat by me. Now both say, see, when we hear that, we kind of automatically assume, why doesn't Reuven want to eat by me? Why not? Because he doesn't like me. So no, let's be down the cuffs close. Reuven likes you, a likable guy, right? So instead, Reuven maybe doesn't want to impose. He doesn't want to impose. Or maybe he feels that Rav will say, it's me. I'll tell you, like, also, when I was davening by the coastal on Shabbos night, I saw such an amazing, I saw this chassid, and again, the guy was dressed like, clothing looked so tattered, like a shtreimel that was all in disarray, and a bekashe, and he's going over to the American Bachrim, who are down, and he's inviting them over for Shabbos meals. And what I wanted to tell the guys was, please don't accept, Bachrim accept anything, right? Anything. Like if it doesn't move, right, they'll go. Like it doesn't. And I want to say to the guys, like, don't just say you have other plans. Say you have other plans, because I'm telling you, like, this is one of these stories where this guy's kids are not going to eat because they're going to perform the mitzvah of hachnasas archim. It was just so incredible. You literally, it's like mikamcha, you saw the most beautiful thing. In any event, so we'll say, so I just want to point out what's happening over here. So Reuven's saying no to me. Reuven's saying no, but I'm not taking no for an answer. So what does he do? He makes a neder. Now we'll say, so the Gemara says, so why does he frame the neder in such an extreme way? Konam, that I'm not going to go ahead and go into your home. I'm not going to drink a drop of your water. Why does he frame it in such an extreme way? Ultimately, again, because there's a concern, sadikim omrim ma'at va'osin harbe. That ultimately, again, if he takes a sip of my water, if he knows that I'm allowed to give him water, I'm going to keep giving him more. Now, both say, why does the Gemara frame this as sadikim omrim ma'at va'osin sadikim? That's true, maybe by sadikim. Who is this talking about? Who's the case about over here? The case is not about sadikim. Who's the case about? About me and Reuven. They both say, what do you see from here? See here's something amazing. That when a Jew does a mitzvah, he is a tzaddik. So the Baal HaTanya writes this idea. The Baal HaTanya says that we think the definition of tzaddik and rasha is like a composite term. In other words, who's a tzaddik? Well, if you look at my life in any given moment, if I have more mitzvos than averos, I'm a tzaddik. More averos than mitzvos, I'm a rasha. It's kind of like a sum. The Baal HaTanya says that's not the case. Tzaddik and rasha is also based on a snapshot. When I'm doing a mitzvah, I'm a tzaddik. In that moment, I am a tzaddik. When I do an aveira, in that moment, I am a rasha. Which I both say such an incredible way to look at our lives, because sometimes you think about it. We say, I wish I could be a tzaddik, but I'm not going to be a tzaddik. I'll settle for being a good guy. But say it's not true every single time a yid does a mitzvah. By definition, I am a tzaddik. That's what it means when it says over here, tzaddikim omrim ma'at v'osem. I'm inviting a Jew for achnasas archim. I'm inviting a Jew in that moment. I'm a tzaddik. B'shas ma'asav a mitzvah. Say, what a way to look at ourselves. I daven, I'm a tzaddik. I put on tefillin, I'm a tzaddik. I give tzedakah, I'm a tzaddik. Okay, I speak lashon hara, I'm a rasha. Right? But again, but lamaisa, I would say, but it's incredible. It's not a composite term, right? It's not way my entire life. It's in the moment. But depending on how I behave in that moment creates that moment of self-definition. That's why, again, the Gemara could say, any Jew who's doing hachnasas archim is tzadikim omrim ma'at va'osim harbe. A tzaddik, who's talking about tzaddikim? Yeah, because anyone who's doing a mitzvah hachnasas archim in that moment is considered to be a tzaddik. So incredible. The Gemara goes right. Am Rav Yehuda Rav Asi. Arbon nedarim halolu tzrichin she'el l'chacham. So both says it's very interesting. So now the Gemara says these nedarim require she'ela. Now we'll say we're going to get into this a little bit. She'ela means you have to go through a process of revocation. Now we'll say we're going to get into. There are different processes, right? We've alluded to this during many times over the. I mean, we're only 21 blot in, but now we're going to begin to get into some of these processes. So here's the problem. Shmuel Amar Tana Tani arba nedarim hitiru chachamim va'at amrim tzrichim sheila chacham. So that doesn't make sense. I will say the Mishnah says arba nedarim hitiru chachamim, which means what? These 4 categories of nedarim are permitted by Chazal. Now, I will say we understand what does it mean permitted by Chazal? What does that mean? They're void. In other words, they're not a neder. So they do not require any type of mechanism for annulment or revocation. So now why are you saying that these nedarim need a she'ela, need to go through a chacham? So Rabbi Yosef Masnil Hashmaita B'Hailishna. Rabbi Yosef had a different version of this. I'm Rabbi Yehuda Rav Asi. Ein chacham rashay lahatir ela ke'ein arba'a nedarim halalu. Wow. Here we go, Rabbi Yosef. So this is going to open the door to a tremendous sugya. So Rabbi Yosef said like this, that Rabbi Yehuda said Rav Asi, that Rabbi Yosef, when a chacham wants to be matir a neder, right? When a chacham wants to, we're going to use the lashon of permit a neder. When can a chacham permit a neder? Only if the neder is like one of these 4 nedarim. Now, what does that mean? What does it mean if the neder is like one of these 4 nedarim? So let me tell you this outside for just a moment. There are two ways. Well, there's more than 2 ways, but for our purposes right now, let's look at 2 ways that a neder could be permitted. Number 1, is through charata. What's charata? Charata means I regret having made the neder. Okay? We're going to see why that works, how that works, but there's a concept like that. I regret having made a neder. And then I will say there's what's called a Pesach. A Pesach means you find an opening. Now, finding an opening can manifest itself in a couple of different ways, but the simplest example of it would be as follows. Imagine the following situation. I made a neder not to drink wine. Chas v'shalom, lo alin rachman al-Islam, right? I made a neder not to drink wine, right? And then what happens? I go to the chacham and I say, you know what? I would like you to go ahead and annul this neder. So the chacham says, tell me, is there some type of opening? I say, you know what? Yeah. Had I realized at the time that I made the neder that I would not be able to make kiddush on wine, I would have never made the neder. So a Pesach means we create an opening. An opening usually comes about when I recognize that there's a piece of information that had I been cognizant of it at the time I made the neder, I would have never made the neder. So I will say, 2 different things. Charata just means it's Tuesday. I haven't had a glass of wine in 26 hours, and life is already getting a bit unbearable, right? So lemaisa, that's called charata. I regret having made the neder, right? I regret it. So Pesach means there's something more profound, there's something more systemically wrong with the neder. In other words, had I been cognizant of a certain piece of information, I would have never made that neder to begin with. So Rabbi says, now listen to this. So this is incredible. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the Ravasi, that a chacham, Rabbi say, when you look at the nedarim of our Mishnah, Rabbi say, why? So these nedarim essentially, they have like a quote unquote Pesach. Now, it's not a real Pesach because these nedarim are void from the beginning. But Lamaisa, in these nedarim, essentially, we know that there's something intrinsically wrong with the neder from the beginning. So Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Ravasi that whenever a chacham wants to be matir a neder, he has to be matir a neder like the nedarim in our Mishnah, namely, charata is not a valid mechanism to annul a neder. Just because the vower regrets having made the neder, that's not enough. There has to be a Pesach. I will say, take a look at the Ran. Here we go. The Ran says, Ein chacham matir ela ke'ein arba nedarim halalu. On the right-hand side, about 5 lines into the short lines, the Ran writes, Kilomar, she'ein lo lahatir becharata, ela bepesach. Sha'aneder kishu nitar bepesach, mochiach misocho shehu neder tos. See, I will say, what does a Pesach do? A Pesach says, had I been cognizant of certain information at the time I made the vow, then what? I would have never made it, which means that the neder itself is fundamentally mistaken. V'havi ke'ein arba nedarim. And I will say, in that respect, then a neder that was made without complete information is like one of the nedarim of our Mishnah. Because we'll say, what's the common denominator about the 4 categories? We only do the first category. What's the common denominator amongst the 4 categories? They're not nedarim. So too, when the Chacham finds a Pesach, when the Chacham finds an opening in the neder, it turns out that the neder was taken under mistaken pretenses, mistaken conditions, and therefore the neder could be voided. Aval becharata lo. But ultimately, again, by charata, we'll say, what happens with charata? What's charata? Right, the vower shows up in front of Beis, in front of Chacham. What does he say? I regret it. Shkoyach, you regret it. I regret a lot of stuff in life. right? That does not mean that I have the ability to go out and take it back, right? So charata, we're going to see charata is the lowest form, the lowest bar for potential revocation. So the idea the Gemara is pointing out over here is charata is not a valid form of revocation or annulment. Rather, there has to be a Pesach. Finish up the Adif Pesach mecharata. We'll say, here we go. Now you see why Pesach, finding an opening, is stronger than remorse, than charata. Lefisha kol neder she nitra b'Pesach, hare hanoder omer shafilu b'tchila kishenadar, ilu haya nosin aliba osa Pesach, lo haya noder. V'nimtza nidra b'tas. Shavosai, when you annul a neder with the Pesach, what does the Pesach do? The Pesach says, had I been cognizant of the information that I know now then, right? Had I been cognizant of that information at the time I made the vow, then what? Had I known that I can't make Kiddush on wine Friday night, I would have never made the neder. Oh, so that's powerful. That's powerful. What that says now is that the entire, in other words, essentially, I've eroded the entire authenticity of the neder itself. Abal neder shunita b'charata, finishing the Ran. But I will say, if all you come to the basin with is with remorse, see, when I say I regret it, what does that mean? What does that mean, I regret it? I regret it when? When? I regret it now. Now, the truth is, I was fully cognizant of what I was doing at the time I made the neder, but I just regret having done it. Shkoya. Okay, I got it. You regret having done it. I will say, the problem is, charata does not erode the fundamental authenticity of the neder. Pesach erodes the fundamental, not authenticity, effectiveness of the neder. It turns out that the neder really was taken under a certain mistaken understanding. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, that creates an opportunity for revocation or annulment. Incredible. So let's go back to the Gemara. This is some stories. Everyone loves stories. The guy who came before Rav Huna. Amrlei, libcha lecha. He says, tell me, was your heart settled with you when you took the neder? Now, if you take a look at the Ran says, Kilomar, haya libcha miyushav alecha b'shas shenadarta, v'gam achshav ino tov nederecha. Were you okay? In other words, were you in a good state of mind when you made the neder? Amar lei lo, and he said no. He said at the end of the day, I was not of sound mind when I made the neder. If that's the case, Amar lei lo v'shariyeh. And therefore, again, Abosai, ultimately, Rav Huna permitted the neder. And Abosai, this is actually a case of charata. This is a case of charata, according to the Ran. Right? What's happening over here is Rav Huna is saying charata does work. Charata does work. If you look at Amar lei lo, Kamar shalom mitoch yishuv adas nadarti betchila ulefichach ani mischaret kishenadarti mi olam mishumachi shariyeh. So Abosai, umiu dafka becharata demekara. Now, the Ran points out that maybe this is a different kind of charata. Maybe Rabbi said there's two kinds of charata. This is actually interesting. There's present remorse and there's retrospective remorse. In other words, present remorse says, right now I regret it. So retrospective remorse says, the truth is, even at the time I made the neder, I wasn't of sound mind. So I really regret ever having made it because I wasn't in the right frame of mind. Again, so just think about it. So far what we have, Rabbi say, is Pesach. Right? And now the Gemara is according to Rabbi Yehuda Rabbi Yosef, Pesach works, charata doesn't work. Because annulling a neder with a Pesach is similar to the Nedarim in our Mishnah. And I know that sounds strange, because the Nedarim in our Mishnah don't work. The reason why the Nedarim in our Mishnah don't work is why? Why? Because I understand from the beginning they weren't Nedarim. A Pesach is kind of like that as well. A Pesach says, there's a piece of information that you have now that had you had that piece of information at the time you made the neder, then what? You would have never made the neder. Everyone agrees that Pesach works. Rav Yehuda named Rav Yosef says, charata doesn't work. Now Rav Yosef comes along Rav Huna, and Rav Huna says, maybe Allah Chalamai says different kinds of charata. There's retrospective charata, there's present charata. Hahuda asla kamei d'Rabbi Rav Huna. We'll see that Allah Chalamai says all this. Hahuda asla kamei d'Rabbi Rav Huna. There was a guy who came before Rabbi Rav Huna. Amar lei. So listen to this. So the guy made a neder. Right? He wanted to have the neder revoked. What happened? Amar lei, ilu haya asara b'nei adam she'fayisucha ba'osa shah minadarta. If there were 10 people to calm you down at the time you made the neder, would you still have made the neder? Amar lei lo. He said, no, I would have never made the neder, and therefore, again, based on this, v'hitiru. And I will say, what's the heter over here? Take a look at the first white line in the Ran. He says, "V'ika de garis kasar postlin becharata v'akol ol tamachas." So we'll say, so again, the Ran has two different versions of reading this. This once again could either be a case of charata or ultimately again a case of Pesach. I will say, let's go with the idea, the reading, that this is a case of charata as well. So Tanya, Rabbi Huda Omer, Omrim lo la'adam leiv ze'alecha. So im amar lav matirin also. So ultimately, again, same idea, but we'll say. So I want to point out over here, what the Gemara is doing is, after the Gemara got finished saying that halacha l'maisa, you could only annul a neder with a Pesach, not charata. So the Gemara gives other examples of opinions who say that charata works as well. In the world of charata, we now see two different forms of charata. This present charata. What's present charata? Guy shows up in Beis Din and says, I regret ever having made the neder. Okay? Second form of charata, we'll call retrospective charata. I wasn't in the right frame of mind when I made the neder. So again, all these different cases swirling around. So the Gemara tells this story over here. Tanya Rabbi Huda Omer. Rabbi Huda says, Omer lo, we say to the guy, Omer lo the Adam, Leiv ze alecha, were you of sound mind? I will say again, Leiv ze alecha is also the same type of lashon. Im Amar Lav, if he says, no, I was not of sound mind, I am not of sound mind, then halacha l'maisa, matirin also. We ultimately, again, are matir the neder. So I will say, so again, what it sounds like halacha l'maisa again is this retrospective charata? Is this present charata? We'll stop over here for today, but Amir Tzibos say we'll continue this. So what we've just now entered into are the mechanics of revocation. We know that Pesach works according to everyone, and Pesach seems to take its cue from our Mishnah. The shaila is, does charata work? And if charata does work, what type of charata is effective? Shkoyach. All right, Chavra and Zoom, have a great day, everyone.